Okay, so in midlife, we may come to a place where we're experiencing unexpected weight gain. That, like what you described, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
All the same things that were working before, all of a sudden, what the heck, right? So what happens? Why does that happen? Well, if you listen to my call from last week, I talked about how Christiane Northrup talks about why different wake-up calls we have in our life, you know, PMS, seasonal affective disorder, postpartum depression, and perimenopause as the mother of all wake-up calls, okay? So at this time, all this stuff that's unresolved is coming to the surface. And the more stuff that we have that's unresolved, the more symptoms we have, the more weight gain we have, the worse we feel, okay? But this is not a negative thing. This is an opportunity to address underlying stuff, okay? So some of the things that get us to this tipping point are metabolic stress that's long-term and been cumulative through our life, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in this next section. Toxic stress, in which our sympathetic nervous system is engaged on a continual basis, which puts us into a complete hormonal shitstorm. We'll talk about that too. Relationship changes. As I mentioned in the talk last week, you know, this is a kind of time where we might be experiencing boundary conflicts with people because our standards and our requirements are raising, basically. And so we are maybe no longer as willing to let things, the status quo, go because we're coming into our truth saying time, and you know, we're saying how we feel about things. That could you know, cause some conflicts with people. And so we might be experiencing relationship changes as a result of those conflicts. And those conflicts are not necessarily a bad thing. It's how we approach them that we need to be mindful of. Caretaking. There are women in this group who are taking care of their mothers and their fathers, and that's an additional burden, and some of them already parents to young children. And then also the resurfacing of old traumas, which we talked about last week. And this being a time that we want to go and heal unresolved emotional things from the past, which is a natural emotional process that kind of coincides with perimenopause, or an opportunity that coincides with perimenopause. So we have this health bank account that we put into and that we take out of. And the health bank account is fed, among other things, with activities that stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest. That's where we relax. That's where we heal. That's where we feel calm, okay? And the nerve that is responsible for that nervous system is very responsible. The primary nerve is called the vagus nerve, which connects our gut to our brain. So the more we can do activities that nourish that vagus nerve and that vagal nerve tone and stimulate our sympathetic nervous system, the more money we're putting into our health savings account, okay? And we're building up our reserve there. We're creating resilience. We're creating long-term health. We are creating a foundation that we can live from in a more homeostatic way, okay? On the other side of the coin, we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight, flight, and freeze, okay? Every time that is activated, we're literally taking money out of that nice health savings account that we've built up with our parasympathetic activities, okay? Literally every time. So anytime you feel like you're going into that fight or flight, you're getting so emotionally triggered that that's happening, you are literally taking away from your health. So we have to find ways to manage this. That's why I've put a lot of this stuff in Periwink around stress management, around cortisol, and kind of things that help with the parasympathetic nervous system. So the more we can practice that, the better we're going to feel, the longer term health we have. Okay. Also, your life and relationships reflect your ability to nourish yourself. And when women in this stage find that they've been caring for others or meeting the needs and expectations of others their entire life, and now they're ready for a change, that's an opportunity to nourish yourself metaphorically and literally in a different way. Okay, so what happens to us? Something that I get really frustrated about when I see a lot of talk about menopause online and even in great publications and talks and podcasts and articles, all I hear about is hot flashes. Hot flashes are real, okay? But that is further down the road in perimenopause than when most women start to actually experience symptoms. What is not addressed, which frustrates the heck out of me, is estrogen dominance, okay? Nobody ever discusses estrogen dominance, even the doctors. Estrogen dominance happens to most of us in the beginning of perimenopause. Because what happens isn't our estrogen just doesn't take a diver in the beginning. What happens is progesterone starts to decrease. And our progesterone and our estrogen have to be in balance with each other. The ratio has to be right. So when the progesterone falls, it leaves estrogen too high, okay? Now, it can just be generally a little bit too high in relationship, or it can be that you have spikes of estrogen, which I do. And I can feel when they're, now that I know, I can feel it happening. So when that happens, that estrogen dominance, imagine estrogen is our, like I said last week, it's our beauty, our femininity, our roundness, our softness, our caretaker. Those are all attributed to estrogen, right? What else is attributed to estrogen? It is a growth factor. Estrogen is what helps us to grow babies. Estrogen is what helps us to grow, our eggs. So because it's a growth factor, it also grows our fat cells. So if our progesterone is not in proper alignment with our estrogen, we're going to have bigger fat cells. Now, there's this whole myth about fat loss. We don't lose fat. Our body does not lose fat. Our body has the same amount of fat cells always. They either grow bigger or they shrink. So fat loss is really fat shrinking. So when you have excess estrogen and it stores in your fat because your liver's not metabolizing, I'll get back to that in a second, what happens is your fat cells get bigger, okay? So that is a big problem in perimenopause that is not discussed. So there are ways that you can manage estrogen hormonal disruption in perimenopause. And I'll talk about each one of these. So you can avoid conventional red meat. Conventional red meat is chock full of estrogen. So the more you can eat grass-fed meat, organic red meat, the better. Fish, poultry, great. There are some goitrogenic vegetables that, when eaten raw, like kale, have an effect on the thyroid. That disruption can also cause weight gain. There are many phytoestrogens in soy products, even in flax seeds, which might be good on the other side of menopause. But during perimenopause, I would be very cautious about adding anything that is increasing my estrogen when I'm already probably at a progesterone deficit, okay? Alcohol is horrendous for estrogen dominance, because what happens when we have excess hormones, any kind of excess hormones in our body, they're processed through our liver. So in this time in perimenopause, our liver's already working hard. Our liver's already trying to clean out all the excess. Our liver is our fat burning organ too. So it's trying to like process all these excess estrogens, other hormones that are not in balance. And then if we add alcohol into it, it slows our ability to metabolize that alcohol. It slows our ability to process the estrogen. And basically it funnels the excess estrogen to our fat cells, which then make us fatter. Well, make us look fatter, make our fat grow in size instead of shrink. The other thing is avoiding plastics. I read something the other day. I was like, oh my God, like the average person ingests a credit card worth of plastic a week. That's just in processed food, in the packaging, in cosmetics, in all, breathing. A credit card a week. That's nuts. Well, there's tons of estrogens, environmental estrogens in those that get into our body. And there's a lot of environmental pollutants. There's pollutants in waters. It's really as much as you can do to limit your estrogens and limit that hormonal disruption through your lifestyle. I mean, we're surrounded by it. It's overwhelming, actually. I even stopped using stevia because I read some information when I found out that I was estrogen dominant. I read some information that stevia can be hormonally disruptive. So consider, if you've been using stevia for a long time, maybe you want to consider using something else. So now I use honey instead. Okay. The other thing that's going to help affect our ability to maintain our weight is cortisol. I'm going to talk more in depth about the hormones and hormone replacement and all that other stuff in another talk, but I'll tell you, I've mentioned cortisol before. I'll mention it again. It's a lot of our sleep habits are around cortisol, okay? And our stress management is also around cortisol. We need cortisol. Cortisol is our get up and go hormone. We need cortisol in the morning in order to wake up and start our day, okay? And our cortisol and melatonin, I mentioned in the sleep talk, are in an inverse relationship. So we want to make sure that they're balanced and that we're getting our cortisol circulating in our body at the right time. So that's most cortisol in the morning, decreasing over the day so that by the time we get to bed, our melatonin is at a height and we're ready to sleep, okay? Our melatonin is gonna decrease through the night so that we're ready to wake up with our cortisol again, okay? But what happens with cortisol is produced by our adrenal glands. It's our stress hormone. It is the hormone that sends us into fight, flight, and freeze. So it is a hormone that stimulates that sympathetic nervous activity that robs our bank account, our health bank account, okay? So it's very important that we do things that nourish our adrenal glands and control spikes of cortisol, okay? Because what happens also with cortisol, not only does it rob our health savings account, like I just mentioned, but it messes up and it actually steals the building blocks of other hormones that we need in order to maintain our best balance, including DHEA, estrogen, and progesterone. So it works against the balance of all these other hormones. So if your cortisol is off, it's going to make a cascade effect on all these other hormones. So the way to address that is by optimizing our sleep, optimizing our nutrition, and also making sure that we have moments of pleasure instead of moments of stress. So dialing into the things that bring us joy in midlife are going to help us offset the cortisol as well.